It's Mama Mystic. I know you've been waiting for so long. I have promised this podcast for years, but it's here now. And I hope you go on and hit that subscribe button, like and follow wherever you are, because we need you in this movement. We need you in this community. Now I'm going to tell a long story that some of you know bits and pieces and parts of. But I really don't know that very many people at all know the whole thing. And I've decided it's time to share. You see, I've just turned 50. And I'm at a place in my life that I never expected to be. The current situation, if I was standing at a bedside in the ER with one of you, and I had to give an SBAR report, the current situation is that I have the mobility and flexibility living in an RV full time with my better half Cliff to be as mobile as I need to go to the places that need help where I can serve in the best capacity. I have the freedom to pick and choose those places. The financial resources are better in contract work, but not as consistent. So you sacrifice the stability for the higher price tag. But that's where our profession is at. To be fair, I have recently tried to take a staff position as a bedside RN in the emergency room. And I was quickly reminded why I can't do that anymore. The degree of abuse from patients, from peers, and from profession of nursing and industry of healthcare is just too brutal to be soaked in indefinitely. So then at 50, when you look back and you say, okay, where are you and where do you want to go? Well, my dreams have changed. In 1997, when I started my nursing journey, I was young and I just wanted to get my degree, pass my boards, and build a life, a home, and a family. And that's exactly what I did. I went to work, and I was very successful at that. I was pregnant many times. I think the overall count was 8. And in all that pain and suffering, I have 3 wonderful young men as sons. Now, right now, they're walking their own journey through their 20s, which is not something I would want to do again. But they don't speak to me right now. They don't agree with my life choices. We'll get to that later, but I've been accused of being on permanent vacation. I've also been accused recently of not participating as a team member appropriately through the staff position I have. So I took a staff position at what I thought was a credible organization with strong ties to the community's faith. And when I got into that environment, I quickly saw that it was not safe, that they were not doing things in the very basic mindset of patient safety first. And they were not willing to have the hard discussions about the pain and suffering their patient populations are going through. So those are the reasons that I've left that position. You see, when I started nursing in 1997, I was the product of generations of nurses and nursing knowledge that had been bred into me. I was raised in a community where our family doctor took care of the family. And he did it whether he was in his office or not. I was raised and raised my children in a community where if I ran into my doctor in the grocery store, he would ask me how the kids were doing, if the antibiotics they gave us the week before were working out, if they had gotten well and gone back to school. I could see the nurse practitioners at school functions, and they would tell me, hey, I see this in your son, and I think we should really think about doing X, Y, or Z. These providers were engaged and actively watching and listening to their patient population to facilitate a more healthy and well community. Now, it was in the Deep South, and it's not a perfect place. But those community standards and that degree of woven, shared, and supported mindset for raising a family or rearing a family, however you prefer, was the reason I stayed until my children were grown. I've been through so much with my health, with my profession, with my country, in my service. And I see so many of you who are 18, 19, 20, and beyond, making decisions and trying to weigh what the future may bring to what's actually really here now. And I need you to know some things. So, when a young nurse who is 2 or 3 years out of school and they're trying to rack up their certifications so they can be the best on their unit, and they're really working hard to make sure they're scanning their meds appropriately, they're making sure their patients are comfortable and their needs are met. They are so task oriented and have turned into such customer service personnel rather than nursing clinicians that we've lost sight of why we're really here. Nobody gets up and puts on scrubs or a uniform or straps on belts and hoses to go fight fires because of the paycheck they bring home. That's just not a reality. You may think, oh, you're a travel nurse or You've been a nurse for so long, you must make tons of money. I don't. I barely make enough money to pay my bills. And the reason for that is I raised a family before I traveled. I made mistakes. I'm going to share those with you. I made mistakes in big decisions and little decisions. And I need you to know what my mistakes were so you don't make them. And I can save you that pain. Now, understanding that it is not the same world that I grew up in. I did not raise my children in the same world I grew up in. I was fortunate enough to raise my children in a community based on faith and love for one another that had transcended civil disrest and a changing country, but had still preserved its history and its legacy. And that was in the South. It wasn't until we began rewriting history. So that meant we unlearned the lessons that our history and traditions taught us, that it became necessary for me to find a different place, a different community, or just a different view from what I'd always had. Because you see, the world changed in 2020. And I was right in the middle of it with many of you. So we're going to start earlier than that. Because like I said, while some of you know pieces of the story, I don't know that all of you or any of you know all of it. So we're going to start in 1997. I had completed my 4-year degree at Alcorn State University, which is a fabulous organization and facility that has been very good to me over the years. I've lost touch recently. I don't know what's going on inside the university now because I've been traveling across the country. But when I was there, both as a student and as faculty, they were very good to me. The university main campus is in rural Mississippi. In Lorman is the name of the town that the university is located in. And it's a beautiful campus. I made some of the best friends I have ever had across my lifetime while I was in nursing school. And the more nurses I meet across the country, the more I hear the very same things from them. They made bonds and relationships and connections in nursing school that have not been matched across their lifetimes. You see this often in professions, like doctors. Many of them have fond memories of relationships they made in medical school or fellowships or residencies. The newer generations are treasuring those better than we do. And that's a good thing to see. It's actually part of what inspired this podcast. Now, when you get into the why of this podcast and why now, it's because over my profession and over my travels, I've met so many wonderful people who are like-minded and who have similar values, regardless of what country they come from or what their cultural background is. They believe in a higher power. They believe in law and order. They believe in merit. They believe that their hard work is going to serve a calling greater than themselves. And that's so important. Within this story I'm going to tell you, you're going to realize just how valuable those people are. So who am I? My name is Mystic. To many of you who've been waiting on this podcast, I'm Mama Mystic. To my 3 children, I'm Mama. just not one they like right now. To their friends, I'm Mama Mystic. So I'm offering a space in Mama Mystic's community and work family to anybody who likes this message. But be very clear. The message is about self-accountability, self-care, and self-empowerment to produce a greater good. I have a specific way I do that. It has taken me decades to come up with this. Well, to actually be able to put into words what I've known for a very long time. And I'm going to tell you who told me. It was my granny. It was my granny who was internet dating in the 90s, who traveled the world unapologetically, and who raised her 6 kids to be independent, productive humans, even if she didn't agree what they actually did with their lives. There was no judgment. Well, there was probably some bitching, but there was no judgment. She didn't interfere. She always said they were grown and she had enough problems on her own plate. There are those who thought that was selfish. There are those who criticized that. It made me think. So going back to our story, we'll get to Granny later. With has been helping people, humans, especially nurses and doctors and respiratory therapists, and all the support people who help us do our job, the law enforcement who keep us safe, the fire guys that keep us safe, search and rescue that are angels that come from above to save you when you're lost and scared. They're heroes. Then they get pissed after COVID when you call them heroes. So I've rethought that since I wrote my first book. They are heroes in the best definition of the word. But I've come to think of them as warriors, fighting a war that no one will declare, fighting for your healing, for your freedom to live well and long. But nobody takes care of them. I didn't take care of myself. We try to take care of each other the best we can. But there's so much hurt and so much disease and so much hate. There's just not enough time in the day to take care of everyone in need, save lives, and take care of ourselves. So after my last brush with death, because of chronic disease mostly stemming from morbid obesity, I decided to come up with a way to translate how I had recovered into something that's usable. Now it's mine, it's signature. It has groundings in evidence. It has parts that are interpretable in different ways from different cultures, and that's intentional or on purpose. I call it iNAMS, little I, big NAMS, like iPhone. And it's simply investing in yourself through nourishment, real nourishment, not the box kind or something that comes in a powder or a pill. Real nourishment for your body and soul. Adventurous activities, because if we don't move, we die. And that's just a fact. It may not happen overnight, but it will eventually happen. Mindful meditation, prayer. I'm Southern Baptist with some other religions mixed in there. But over my travels and through my work family, I've learned so much about the different religions across the country and the world. And there is something to be said for having an open mind and understanding why large groups of people over time appreciate a certain framework to live by. Doesn't mean you have to adopt it for yourself, but it means you might could take some of those ideas and that philosophy and apply it to your own self and your own belief structure. Because the dumbest thing anybody's ever said to me was don't change. It's kind of like a death wish. If you don't change and adapt, you cannot grow. Well, I may have taken that a little too far over the years. It is what it is. So, if I'm really honest, I don't really regret any of it. I don't really regret the mistakes I made. I don't really regret that my children are mad at me right now, because the choices I made with the best information and resources I had. And I did what was best, or what I thought was best at the time, for myself and my family. Now, the family I raised my children in no longer exists. It was killed with divorce and circumstance and PTSD and all kinds of other nasty things. I mourned it for a long time, and then I accepted it. And then I began to hate it and the prison that it had turned into. Because you see, I made a choice in 2008. I made a choice to wait it out. And I exercised probably the entire amount of patience I was ever given as a human being. And I waited for my kids to get grown. I knew my marriage was over. I knew that I would have to work like 2 or 3 people for the next years to get out of the mess I was in. And I was prepared to do that. And I did it. I worked 12-hour days, 6, sometimes 7 days a week for years at a time. The byproduct of that commitment to be sure and not leave a mess worse than the one I found myself in 2008 cost a lot. It cost me my health. It cost me children. It cost me jobs. It cost me moral integrity. And it cost me my marriage. But by the time 2021 rolled around, after the pandemic, doing the things I had to do, I was not in a place where I could share any piece of me that was not torn and battered and broken. So I left. And I left my children in the care of the community that had loved them their entire lives. And I know that community has wrapped their arms around them and taken them into their heart, and I left them with their Father who loves them. And I left an open door for them to reach out when they wanted to or needed to. And here we are, 2025. The reaching out has gotten less. It's only when they need something now. I don't know if that's because they're just busy trying to figure life out, or if it's because they hate my guts. The ants in my brain, and we'll get to talking about ants later. The ants in my brain say that it's because they hate me, because of the choices I had to make. I don't have a time machine. I can't go back and redo things. And quite frankly, I don't know that I would. Because the lessons I learned were far better than anything you can read in a book. We're going to talk about those on this podcast. We're going to talk about the details of how you survive financial ruin, mental disasters, mental health disasters, nutritional disasters, climate disasters, social disasters. I'm a disaster junkie. It won't go away. I quit trying to make it go away a long time ago. But at this point in my journey, the reason I would not go back and redo those things is because they taught me how to achieve and work towards balance. Now, I've also been accused of having my head in the clouds. So because I'm a rebel by nature, at some point I said, well, if you want to fucking say it, watch me do it. So I have climbed mountains even though I am terrified of heights. I have driven across mountain ranges and ridden with my whole world in an RV, being pulled by the man that I love, and watched it wobble across forest fires, landslides, and all manner of disasters across this country. And if I didn't have the mental and physical fortitude to watch that and live that in the present every day, then I wouldn't be able to live this life that I'm so grateful for now. And I know that this life that I have now is only possible because I come from a place where the community and the social fabric of that culture wrapped me in warm arms and loved me when I was a child, and taught me that people deserve people who care about them, and that that's a two-way street. So when I think about where I'm at now, I'm in the Pacific Northwest, in an RV park, serving in a community that has been overrun with gang violence, human trafficking, and social unrest. There are riots in the streets. They are throwing garbage and spitting on policemen. They're violent with each other and our social fabric. There are parents who are scared their children will be stolen off of the street corner. And it's a legitimate fear, because I've seen the bodies of the children that are pulled from the border when I worked on the southern border. The news reports don't give the abuse and the cruelty justice, because I've seen it with my own eyes. The women who are raped and battered and beaten to where they can't even accept a warm blanket and good food for the first time in weeks. I've mopped up the blood in the hallway that their shoes leave behind them as I just try to get them from a stretcher in the hallway to a bed with 4 walls, if we're lucky, so that they can tell me how they've been violated so I can help them. I've pulled Mama out of the car that a neighbor brought her to the emergency room after she'd been found on the floor and couldn't call out for help for days at a time. And then I've had to break the news to other mamas, or maybe even the same one, I just don't remember at this point, that even though they had been through something traumatic and horrible, and it was the middle of the night, that I could not get her a ride home, that there was nobody to transport her home to her bed, her sanctuary, her space, because it was just too inconvenient for all the people who were awake. When I watch the news, and I don't really give a shit what your politics are. I really don't. Because I think there's good and bad on both sides. And among my work family, maybe you don't know. Let me explain. Among my work family, there are staunch Republicans, far left liberals, middle of the road people who identify as all kinds of politically affiliated things. I don't really care. I believe in humanity first. I believe in protectors first. And I believe in service. And I believe in giving value, human to human, that is understandable, tangible, tactical. It's the shit you can do something with to make tomorrow better than today. And I truly believe that if everybody gave at least 15, 20, 30 minutes a day to do something for somebody else that would make their life a little bit better tomorrow than it is today, then the world would be a better place. Because right now, the world is not a great place. There are beautiful places and beautiful people. But if you listen to the collective zeitgeist narrative, there's pain, there's suffering, there's war. But I've got news for everybody who thinks the war is way over there. No, it's not. Why don't you ask ChatGPT or Google, when was the last time the United States sent Marines to fight on U.S. soil? Were there Marines in the Civil War? Something to look up, isn't it? We don't have to go there. If we go there, it's a choice. I'm not willing to do that. So I think it's time that we're all honest in our mistakes, in our opportunities, in our ideas. And I think it's time that we quit saying, let's rewrite history to make it fit our narrative of today. We need to quit saying that just because your skin color is X, Y, or Z, you deserve A, B, or C. I want to quit seeing Black Lives Matter, all lives matter, humans matter. I don't want to hear about civil unrest in places where you didn't get up and vote with your feet. So you're living in the society you elected and passed laws to support. That's called accountability. You put those leaders there and you let them run your society into a place where there's fires in the street that doesn't come from Mother Nature. I worked in Los Angeles. It was very easy to identify early that it was not a safe place. Now, I've worked in places in the South that I thought the same thing. I was in Memphis for a time. And while there are people there who are wonderful and people that serve selflessly to do the very things I'm talking about, to live tomorrow better than today, to make their neighbors and their families happy, whole, and content in the service they provide to others. But there was a level of moral disease that crept up from chronic disease. And I would stand in that ER lobby, triaging constantly, at the sea of 50, 75 people in the middle of the night who had been waiting for 12, 16, 24 hours to get in a bed. Even if it was just a chair in the hallway, they had waited because they were in such pain and suffering at home that they didn't know if they would be able to survive or live through the night with whatever their complaint was. Now, I left Memphis when I was told that because I could not take care of two people experiencing chest pain at the same time. So, in that role, people who walked into the emergency room and said, I need help, they had to be registered. So we had the right patient with the right identification information for the entire team to work through. They had to be triaged, which means the data had to be collected about where their health status was at that given time. So you collect their vital signs, you get a little bit of history, what their situation is, then you collect more data. You collect blood samples, urine samples, a tracing of their heart to make sure that they're safe enough to wait. And the problem in this particular community was that the need was so great, it didn't matter if you found something life-threatening, there was nowhere to put them. It was so bad that one particular night I took care of 2 gunshot wounds. 2 humans with multiple gunshot wounds in a chair in the hallway. There was no trauma room. There was no team. There was none of the things that we as the nursing profession, and especially emergency nursing, think are necessary to do that safely. So as a nurse, am I supposed to refuse to participate in the care of those humans who need help? I don't fucking think so. So what do we do, and what do we continue to do? We take care of humans in the best way we have with the resources we have at the time. These 2 guys happen to be a father and son. They didn't get shot in anywhere that was quote unquote lethal. They had arm and leg wounds. But those can turn into major problems quickly if you're not watching. But we patched them up in a chair in the hallway, and we sent them out the door in the middle of the night. And the best I've got on how their next few experiences went after our care is that they didn't come back. That's all I've got. In our current health system in the United States, those gentlemen who ended up in that situation to need emergency care, there's no guarantee that they have follow-up care, that somebody looked at their wounds, that they were even educated enough to know what to look for. Because I don't remember if I had time to really drill down and ensure that they knew the information they needed to take care of themselves before they left the emergency room I was serving in at the time. The access to systems, health systems in the United States sucks. It's a complete and utter disaster. I hear time and time again, I wouldn't have come to the emergency room, but I can't get in to see a doctor. Now that's changed over the years. Remember, we talked about I've been doing this since 1997. And when I started nursing, I would get a patient admitted into the hospital, and I could tell you which doctors would need to see that patient because they had been involved in that patient's care in the past. Even if that patient couldn't tell me, I could look at their medical record and know that the doctors who had done things for that human in the past had a vested interest in their care in the present, because there was a bus driver, there was a person running that human's health. Many times it was that human, but sometimes it was their primary care provider. In the mid-2000s, I was involved, and I was very fortunate. I enjoyed my time with Medicare Health Support, which was a contracted agency with McKesson. We worked on the 9 most expensive states across the nation as far as their Medicare and Medicaid expenditures go. So, boil that down, the sickest people across the nation were in 9 states. Those states had chronic disease, diabetes, coronary artery disease, heart disease, and obesity. At this point in my life, I believe it was 2005 to about 2007. I had just had my middle son, who's alive now, and for all I understand, doing great. I knew during my maternity leave, which I had very little time of, I think I had 7 weeks, and because he had to have surgery when he was 7 weeks old, he had pyloric stenosis, I got another week and a half. I knew I couldn't go back to the hospital because from 1997 to 2005, the profession had changed so much. We had moved from primary care family practice physicians to now we had a doctor in the hospital all the time. They were called hospitalists. Now, at the time, I thought, hey, this is cool. I don't have to call and wake the doctor up and make sure his brain is functioning enough when at 2 o'clock in the morning when I'm trying to give him this vital information about how his patient's status has changed or his patient's request. I thought, oh, I'll just have somebody here who is available to me. And that was true. That was a benefit. And this particular intervention in the industry of healthcare did a lot to improve, initially, the quality of life for those family practice physicians. But you see, what we didn't see was the insidious erosion, the slow eating away at the integrity of the relationship between providers and their patients. We didn't understand that we were pouring acid on a relationship that is so valuable and so fundamental in our health and wellness as humanity, as humans. We did it out of convenience and ease. And we sacrificed the very fabric of healing that our ancestors had shown us for centuries before. There were midwives, there were healers, there were wise old people in tribes and communities across the world who knew the value of functional medicine, plant-based medicine, food as medicine, community as medicine. It was the people, it was the grandmothers, my aunts and uncles who would go and get people and bring them to church for that meditative prayer, that focus on behaviors that make the community and the world and yourself better tomorrow than you were today. It was admitting and owning your mistakes and your shortcomings so that you could have faith that whatever power you believe in would give you strength to do better the next day. And you see, those things were so vitally important, and we just threw them away. And I'm guilty. I'm guilty of knowing that my grandparents thrived into their 80s and 90s because they fundamentally believed these things. They believed a lot of things. And we'll get into all of that. But they were the greatest generation. You see, I'm Gen X. Born in 1975 when the Vietnam War ended, Aerosmith was born, and the world changed again. And I guess my roadshow started then. I can only bring you who I am. But I can tell you that who I am is forged in loss, disaster, hard things that other people just don't want to do. There's nobody lining up to serve you during your emergency in the middle of the night. The best advice I can give you after serving in ERs across this country, after serving in boardrooms across this country, after teaching in classrooms across this country, after talking face to face with patients, nurses, and doctors, law enforcement, fire, rescue, pilots across this country, moms, the best I can give you is that we're all accountable. There were bad decisions. There were lessons we chose to ignore. And when 2020 rolled around, we acted like we had not learned a damn thing. And I truly believe that was the first time I really started to doubt the integrity of the medical industry. I had had glimpses before, but I chose to ignore them. That was my mistake. So now I'm at a place where I serve on a contract basis, 13 weeks at a time. Because in 13 weeks, I can meet the community. I can understand what their culture is, how they live their life day to day, the good parts, the bad parts. And I can take that and put it into my toolbox about how to live my life better day to day. I'm going to share all those secrets with you. I'm also going to tell you how I accomplish this life, how I built it, what it really looks like, and how much I've struggled with the choices I made as a mom, as a woman, as a nurse, and as a human. So the thing you need to know is my story is not special. There are many who have the same story as me. So my mission these days is to take care of those people. And unfortunately, there is no niche. There is no pretty label, because you see, my people are mamas. They're trying to make the best decision they can with the information and the resources they have right in front of them. And they're trying like hell to figure out how to milk every little bit out of those resources and that time to better benefit their babies. So it's my mission to help them. Now, my babies don't have babies right now. I'm hoping that they find some wonderful young ladies, which is their choice. Or they find some wonderful humans, whatever their choice, to build a life with that gives them purpose, impact, and sustainability for the long haul. I hope they realize that's what their father and I set out to do. And life just tore it down. But we were able to hold it together long enough for them to grow up. Now, they didn't, the youngest was still 17 when it fell apart. But that was so much better than 3. So while they see that as a failure, I see that as a win. And I see it as a win that they can build their life in a community that took care of me when I needed it and has taken care of them and has allowed me to go out into the world and find out the things that needed to be found out. To identify the places that need to be explored and the places you need to stay away from. Unless you're going to fight. And you may say, well, Mystic, you went. I did. I went to fight. Because somewhere before COVID, I began to realize that this is not a profession. This is a war. We are not living in a peaceful country. I lived through 9/11. I was standing in an ICU. I still remember the patient I was taking care of, where I was standing in the room, and what was on TV as I watched the towers fall. I remember calling my ex-husband and frantic because my child, not the one that was growing inside me, but the one that I had already given birth to, was miles away from me, and I did not know if I could protect him. I remember listening to the phone calls of the people on that plane telling their loved ones that they loved them and that they wouldn't survive. I remember the fear when the plane crashed into the Pentagon, and I thought, oh my God, who's going to save us? We can't even deploy our own military because our leaders have been hit. And about that time, there was a bomb threat at the hospital that I was in. And my leadership in that building reminded me, because I thought, why us? What does this little town in Mississippi have to offer? It's between two nuclear power plants. It's along the Mississippi, along state lines, where barges go up and down the Mississippi to feed this country. And if you couldn't hit New Orleans, well, wouldn't it make sense to hit something just north of it? So we had a bomb threat. Wasn't a real bomb. I guess it was the first version of being swatted. So that's evolved quite a bit, don't you think? I called my husband and I was frantic. Our baby, you need to go get our baby. Now he, at the time, was running a small business, HVAC contractor. And he was busy. And he had to talk me down. He said, honey, he's in a cinder block building at daycare in the safest place in the county. Why would I go get him? He wasn't wrong. He couldn't leave what he was doing. I couldn't leave what I was doing. So the one child we had at the time was as safe as we could make them, in the arms of women that I knew and trusted, with my child, in a place where the Bible was the rule book. And I was so grateful for that. I may not have had the capacity to say that out loud at the time, and for that I'm very sorry. But it gave me a sense of peace to do the rest of the hard things I needed to do. So our world changed. Gone were the days when you could travel unimpeded because you were American. We began to live in fear. And we began to make compromises because we were afraid. Earlier in my life, the internet was invented. I believe the official year was 91 or 94, however you choose to slice that particular apple. I grew up in a time where the only way people knew your business was if they overheard a conversation that was being held in person, or they picked up a party line and listened to your conversation on a real phone with a cord that plugged into the wall, that ran to a wire in the yard, down the driveway, and out to the road. Got a little more complicated than that after those levels. My dad was a phone man, and that's what he did. It was such a different world to be connected. I was amazed. I had always been enthralled with the sci-fi principles of aliens and artificial intelligence and genetic mapping, and I knew it would be the future. I had hoped we would do better, but we did not. So the reality that we live in now is we are all hyper-connected. We know more about complete strangers than we do our neighbors. And there's no accountability. for yourself or anybody else. So now that our world had changed in 2001, I was pregnant with my middle child. I had just found out a few months before that I was pregnant, and it was shocking to me because I had lost a baby very violently in April of that year. We had one of our close family friends who was a physician at the facility pass away because he didn't take care of himself. He was so focused on taking care of his patients and his community and his family that he neglected himself. He had asthma. It was reactive asthma. He treated it himself, and he died. I had to stand there and look at a man who would knock on the back door at 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning, ask me just how cooked the coffee was because he liked it strong and burnt. I would offer to make him a fresh pot, and he would decline and say, "No, Mystic, I like it. I like it hot and dark and burnt." And we would sit and we would talk. We would talk about his patients, his family, the community, politics, how businesses in the area work, how industry works. He taught me so much. And that was true of all of the physicians back then, even the ones that chewed my ass for being stupid. I remember one particular internist who chewed my ass up one side and down the other more than once. And I was on the verge of tears, and those of you who've worked with me know that's rare. But I was on the verge of tears one particular day. And he said to me, he said, "Mister, you know why I'm hard on you?" And I said, "No, but I'd really like to know why." He's like, "Because you can do better. And you have such potential. I will be hard on you until I think I've gotten everything out of you." And it was in that moment I understood the difference between nurses and doctors. Because nurses see a piece of the puzzle. And we were being trained at that point in time to focus on the pieces and make sure each piece was perfect and perfectly aligned with the core measures or the algorithms that we were being encouraged to comply with at the time. But the doctors, they saw the whole. They saw the whole person. They saw humanity for what it was within the system. And those physicians, the ones who were treating the whole family, the whole community, they made an impact in not just their offices, but in the boards they sat on, in the schools they helped run, in the advisory committees that they attended within the community, because they were engaged in their own quality of life. That's not something we have at scale now. But it is something we have. It just looks a little different. And it's going to look more different in the future. There are businesses that I'll introduce you to that run their business, their family, and are actively engaged in their communities for the same reasons. And I really and truly think we need to bring that back. Some of the physicians that I worked with early in my career are long dead and gone now. Some of their children are famous authors. They're functioning at high levels in the very industries we're talking about: energy, commerce, finance, healthcare, government. And they're doing it, or trying to do it, with integrity, I think. It's so hard to tell now. And all of these new channels that we have to communicate, they lack that human touch. Now, I'm not opposed to technology. I use AI all the time. But I will not use AI to replace my humanity. I will not use AI to replace my relationships. I will not use AI to be human for me. And I think that's important because AI is a tool. And just like any other tool, the design and the uses will grow and change. And just like I'm using electricity and the internet now as a tool to talk to you, we'll use AI as a tool to produce and distribute our message and execute our mission, which is to help you be better tomorrow than you are today. And you may say, well, Mystic, how in the world can you do that? iNAMS. Because when you invest in yourself through nourishing consumption, mindful meditation, and sustainable resources like sleep, it'll change your world. I didn't know that until I met Cliff. A few short years later, a couple of kids later, when my youngest child was an infant, I was working as a provider outreach coordinator for Medicare Health Support, which was contracted through McKesson. We had, over these 9 states I talked about earlier that were so sick and so expensive for Medicare and Medicaid, we had identified several things in 2005. That regular contact in real time with your primary care provider changed clinical outcomes for the better dramatically. Tools like a scale to know how much you weigh. Like a glucometer to check your sugar. Connections from those tools to your provider who had the expertise to tell you what to do next in real time had fundamental and exponential impact on people's health and quality of life. We thought when we ended that project, I left right before it was over, but we thought that Obamacare would roll those principles into a healthcare system or a restructured system that served people better. Because by this time, we had not only devolved our primary practice into hospitalists and sniffists. And if you don't know what a sniffist is, it's a skilled nursing facility hospitalist. So it's someone who takes care of people who are in long-term care, nursing homes, rest homes, retirement centers. They would take care of those people. We had transitioned into a model where insurance companies told those physicians how to maximize their profits by medicating them and isolating them into groups that were shelved behind closed doors where nobody else could see them. So those humans' social fabric was a series of doctor's office visits and emergency room trips because they were in this hamster wheel cycle of being sick. And that was the first time that I realized that the incentives were misaligned, that we were promoting sickness. And we had even shifted the terminology from chronically ill to disease management. And my faith in our profession began to erode. I thought at that point in my career that I could make an impact on those who were learning to be a nurse, to serve the way I wanted to serve. But I just couldn't find enough resources in myself to be the nurse I wanted to be, and the mom I wanted to be, and the wife I wanted to be. So at that point, when it became necessary for me not to travel anymore because my kids were too young and they had gotten to the age where they needed me much more. And the project I was involved in needed me to travel more, and I could not do that. I was already traveling a couple of days a week within the state, regionally, and across the country, and I didn't have the bandwidth to keep that up and maintain my family. So I had to leave. And I made the choice to go back and teach because I thought that's where the best impact would be. Turns out I was right. Some of the humans I taught nursing school to in those precious year or so I was able to teach have become phenomenal practitioners. And that was the first time I fell in love with teaching. The problem is it doesn't pay shit. And in 2005, 2006, edging up to the catastrophe that was 2008, I had to have more money to make ends meet, to pay the bills. Now, I had made bad decisions. I built a house I couldn't afford. I designed it with one of my best friends in the middle of the night in ICU. We were sitting at the desk, and on a piece of copy paper, I drew out my dream home. I mailed it off to a friend of the family who was an architect, and my ex-husband and I made it happen. Against the odds, we built the house. And it was a wonderful place to raise my boys in the heart of a community that loved them as much as I do. They were a footstep from nature anytime they wanted to go outside. There was no fear that somebody would pick them up. As a matter of fact, the only fear I had was that they would be doing something mischievous and someone would call and say, "Hey, do you know your boys are doing this?" They had a great childhood, as far as I could tell. Then Katrina hit, and our world changed again. The landfall was in Mississippi, in some of my area where I was working with the providers. I had some great colleagues, Patty in Hattiesburg and Meredith. Together, we went out to the communities, to the people who've been impacted, and we tried very hard to support them in rebuilding, recovery, all the things that's involved in that. Because the actual act of a disaster is the least problematic part. We're very good at alert systems. We're very good at sheltering in place, and we're very good at surviving the emergency. We know how to do that. The recovery, the damage to communities and property, we couldn't get to New Orleans. When the levees broke, we couldn't get down there. People were stuck in the Superdome, in places where I had been to concerts and events and Saints games and conferences. We were not prepared. In Hattiesburg, they ran out of water. You know how we come up with a 96-hour preparation rule for disasters? It's because that's how long it took to get a single person there to even find out what was going on. Why is there a national stockpile? Because in disasters like Katrina, we did not have what we needed to save lives. So we came up with plans, processes, and systems to ensure those things never happen again. But we got lazy. We built bureaucracy and red tape in a government that's too damn big to move. And I know what that feels like. Because about this time in my life, 2005, I weighed just over 500 pounds. As a matter of fact, in late 2005, I made a decision that I was going to do something about my weight because I had gotten on the scales and I weighed 511 pounds. Some of that was fluid weight, but still, it was a dramatic number. And it worked to convince me in an instant that I had to change things. I had been in an industry for years that had shown me that a pill or an injection could make all your health problems go away and you could just behave like you wanted to, eat what you wanted to, do what you wanted to, or not do what you didn't want to. Just get a prescription and it'll be okay. That was very dumb of me, particularly. So I made the decision to do something. And in that decision, I did some research. I had made some friends. I had made some connections. So I used my resources. I called up everybody I could. I asked them about bariatric surgery. I asked them about diet plans. I tried. None of it worked. I spent tons of money on supplements that didn't work, on diet plans that didn't work, Jenny Craig, Weight Watchers, all of it. None of it worked. I thought it was me. I thought I was the failure. You see, I couldn't carry even half of my pregnancies to term. There were individuals who had pregnancies they didn't want. I offered to take those children. And they chose to terminate those children instead of giving them to me. So I was in a bad place mentally. And it would be years before I came out of that. Decades even. I don't think I was truly myself again for 10 years, at least. So I made the decision after a lot of research and talking to physicians and surgeons across the country for the best advice. There was no YouTube to dial up and look at a doctor. I mean, if there was YouTube at the time, it was not something I would rely on to make my health decisions, which is much different than today. So I found a surgeon who was straight with me, and he told me, he said, there you have two options. You can have a band placed on your stomach that will decrease the size and the room you have in your stomach to fill with food. He said, but the room is not just the problem. The problem is the choices you're making. He was right. I was choosing easy, convenient food so I could feed my family, be a mom, and work to make ends meet. I did not see where I had a choice. I lived in a rural community by choice because I wanted my children to be raised in that kind of environment. So I sacrificed the availability of technology and infrastructure so that they could have an education that I paid dearly for out of my pocket, me and my ex-husband. We paid in money, we paid in time, we paid in volunteering in our school and the community that was raising our children. And that sacrifice was probably the best investment I ever made because it was an investment in my children. So the hard truth is that I had to make a radical decision to have gastric bypass surgery because I knew that just putting a band over the stomach I already had, I would eat around it. Whether I was eating emotionally or from stress or from convenience at a ballpark or a drive-through because I'd worked 16 hours. Didn't really matter. It was the choice I knew I would make. So I had to wait months before I actually had the surgery because I was so fat I had to lose. They wanted me to lose 70 pounds before I had surgery, but I ended up losing 40. I went on a liquid diet in March of 2006. And I did not have real food again until that fall. You see, I let them cut my stomach in half. And I let them reroute my intestines to where it wouldn't absorb the things I ate. I let them change my anatomy to foster malnourishment for the sake of losing fat that was killing me. At the time, I was pre-diabetic. Now, I told people there was no such thing as pre-diabetes, which was a crock of shit. I was wrong. We now know that insulin resistance is a thing. But back then, we believed that you were either diabetic or not. I told people that. I was wrong. I didn't understand myself or my own health or the food I ate. You see, in nursing school, we didn't get taught that. Those were hard years. Because I had the surgery. I woke up tied to an ICU bed with a tube down my throat, unable to communicate with anybody. I remember it very vividly. It was terrifying. And I had taken care of ventilator patients in the ICU for years. And I began to realize the things we had done to people. Now, those things were necessary to save lives. I don't regret it. I regret the way I went about it in some instances because that's a horrifying experience. So I had the surgery and I lost a lot of weight. Over the next years, I would have family members who had known me my entire life come up and argue with me about who I was because they didn't recognize me. I lost in total about 250 pounds. And over those years, I lost more children. I don't talk about those as much. The last one nearly killed me. I nearly bled to death. I ended up having to find a doctor 2.5 hours away from my hometown, who was a female, who was forward thinking enough to actively listen to what I had lived through. And I'll never forget the first thing she said out of her mouth. Her name is Dr. Shay Moses. The last I heard, she was practicing in Mississippi. She said, "You don't have to be miserable." And it was the first time anybody had ever told me. Yeah, I had been abused in my profession in life. I mean, I left floor nursing because I didn't want to have waste products from humans thrown at me. I didn't want to be physically abused by patients. And I didn't like the corporate mantra of always worrying about the bottom line. That's why I thought teaching was a better choice, a better avenue. But what I quickly learned in the university setting was that it's still very much there. The bottom line is a fact of life. It just had different names. It was in terms of funding and tenure and degree. That was not my cup of tea either. Although the work and the students and teaching and watching nurses bloom from just regular people was amazing. It was an addiction I refused to give up to this day. I just don't do it in a setting called a university anymore because I don't believe in their values. I believe that research should be for the sake of research and that knowledge should be for the sake of knowledge so that it can then be applied to make the world a better place. I do agree with Elon that humanity needs an escape valve, that we need to make humanity multiplanetary. Because if we don't do it, somebody else will. I believed then, and I believe now, that every human has to be accountable for their own well-being and longevity. And the instant you turn that over to somebody else, you've compromised your quality of life. It was at this point I decided. Remember, I was young and energetic. So, we were in 2006 and I had had gastric bypass surgery. There were required visits for a psychiatrist to make sure you didn't have an eating disorder. There were required visits with a dietitian, and they spent a lot of time telling you what you couldn't do, what would no longer be feasible. Now, unfortunately, I took that as a dare. So they tell you things like you'll never be able to have carbonated beverages again. You'll never have to be able to drink coffee again. And those of you who know me know those were two things that I did not listen to. But the surgery still worked, and I still lost a lot of weight. And I got to a point where I was no longer diabetic, no longer hypertensive. All of my risk factors had dramatically changed. I was able to participate in my children's lives and be at ball games and help them practice. And hell, I even coached basketball for a few years. And in that, because life became easier, I never changed my behaviors. I never quit eating fast food. I never started eating whole food. I would buy the thing that would go down and count as nourishment in the easiest, most convenient way I could. And I thought I was doing good. And I was, sort of. But I began to have problems with constipation and gastric motility. And a lot of those problems are slow and insidious, especially when you take in so very little. It's easy to rationalize, oh, well, I didn't eat much today, so I must not be going to the bathroom today. Well, that over time is dangerous. So, about 2007, I did not care for the academic world anymore. I was teaching and working PRN jobs in ERs, and just to make ends meet, because teaching doesn't pay shit. I had a BSN and I was in graduate school, so it would have paid me more if I had had my degree already. So I'm not discouraging anybody from teaching. If that is your calling and your passion, do it. Make it happen. Make it work. One of my best friends in the entire world is a nursing school teacher, and she teaches postpartum and labor and delivery, which is something I absolutely hate. But I will do it if the need is there, as long as somebody who is capable to run that kind of patient care is there. I will be your gopher. I'll be your tech. I'll be your secretary. I'll be your security guard. All of the above. So I went back to the hospital as a director of regulatory readiness, quality, and risk. Not necessarily in that order, but you get the gist. I was one of those weird people who actually understood Joint Commission regulations. Mostly because I read the research behind them. And at this point in 2007, the 98,000 lives study had rolled out, and the public was now aware that medicine makes mistakes. It became public knowledge that there were facilities across the country who had cut the wrong leg off, did surgery on the wrong side of the brain, all manner of things. And while that sounds awful, if you understand the way we get things done in the safest way for the patient, there are blind spots that are hard to predict in life and death situations. So when, for instance, wrong side surgery was a big thing, because there had been surgeries on the wrong body parts, especially when it has to do with laterality. Laterality means you have a left one and a right one. So we began to put in policy and protocols and do education on all of those things. And I began to be enthralled with the data and what the data could tell us. The problem was, at this particular time, there was no laws for meaningful use. There was no laws for portable or portal access to your medical records. It was all still on paper. So that was quite a challenge. And the facility that I worked at was owned by a corporation who did not believe in expending money on things like medical records, electronic medical records. We spent tons of time coming up with forms that could collect all the data that we needed to document, but it still related on humans remembering to do all those things. So we learned a lot about visual cues and how to talk to people about usability of a tool. So that became our reality at that time, but it also became tools in my toolbox for understanding how the workflows and the documentation flows need to harmonize to be able to collect a complete picture of what happens when you seek medical care, receive treatment, and then go to your next step for follow-up. Again, the problem is that we had moved from a single bus driver, your primary care physician, running and coordinating all of your medical care. So back in the day when I first started, if your primary care doctor sent you to a specialist like an endocrinologist or a cardiologist or a pulmonologist, all in the gists, they would send a report back to your primary care doctor. That primary care doctor would then review the information and then talk to you about what the specialist said when he saw you again, if he didn't pick up the phone and call you when he got the report, or she. Those days are gone. Now we have an electronic medical record where computers dump the information in and nobody reviews it but you, unless you have a problem, your own personal medical record. So the fact that most people don't even know how to log into their portal, much less how many they have or how to integrate them into one central place, we have a real problem with people not knowing their personal health information. Now, there are humans who are very proactive and they wear the wearable technology that collects that data and sends it to a device like your phone. And we'll explore all of those resources and the tools to collect that information and be able to use it. I'm very fond of the Aura rings and several of the Whoop bands. And then I'm an Apple person, so the iPhone is amazing. It can collect and store and trend your steps, your sleep cycles, if you just line up your tools to be able to do that. So now we have all these amazing tools. But back then we didn't. So fast forward a few years, I did the whole clipboard walking around in heels thing in hospitals, and was even flew on a private jet to some big conference in Florida with some doctors and some high level industry people. And that just, it really didn't have much soul. So it wasn't something that I really invested a lot in. Now I enjoyed it. I mean, Florida's great. The beaches are wonderful. I mean, who doesn't want a trip to go to Florida? But it just didn't sit well. And I began to have friction between the C-suite people who didn't want to pay for good, safe care, much less great, safe care. When you have to have an argument with bean counters about protecting your staff from injury, and they tell you there's just not room in the budget to keep people safe, it's just not a great place to be. So I did what I thought was right. We had a consultant come in to see how ready we were for a survey. And I didn't cover anything up. I showed them everything. And of course, the C-suite people were shocked, and they didn't want to be reminded that they had been told they needed to invest in these resources. They had been told these were problems. They had been shown the holes that needed to be filled. They just didn't want to invest in them because they wanted to protect their bottom line. Long story short, that company is no longer in business. It has been bought by another company, a bigger one, which probably does things worse if I listen to my work family that I've met in the last few years. They still have outdated EMRs, electronic medical records. They still are understaffed. They still are underprepared for disaster, and they still are under engaged with their workforce, and they still have problems with patient safety and quality of care because they don't invest where it means the most. So I'm eternally grateful not to be involved with those organizations anymore. Not that I wouldn't in the future, but it needs to be a future on a different path. A path towards prevention and doing the things every day that make the long journey better tomorrow than it is today. And I aim for my journey to be about 120, 125 years. Now, my daddy always said that, and he didn't make it quite that far, but I'm going to try to outdo it. So, rounding up to 2012, I was out of town at some conference. I think it was Nashville. I got snowed in Nashville. I couldn't make my flight out. And I got a phone call that my boss had been fired. And as ego and everything else, because I had been fighting to try to get things done and the people that I worked with were trying to do things very well. They were just smarter than I was, and they kept their mouth shut a whole lot more than I did. But they're all good people. They called to let me know. And I was excited, thinking, oh, we were going to do wonderful things now that one of the barriers was gone. But what I didn't realize is that my boss, who had been my mentor and very close to me for a long time, had been protecting us in our ideologic state for a very long time. And she knew that those people with the purse strings were never going to invest until they were made to. So I began to understand when this survey happened and the fallout and everybody had a fit, and of course I got fired, that it was not an industry with the same moral obligations to patients that I felt personally and professionally. So at that point, because my marriage had tanked in 2008, I had to make lots of adjustments quickly for financial reasons. I took a year off so that my ex-husband could make some business moves that would dissolve his prior business and help him financially. During that time, I spent some time with the people that I had grown close to during my days at Medicare Health Support, and we tried to develop a business and a nonprofit that would help small communities like the one where I was raised and raised my children to have better educational outcomes and better workforce management. But the infrastructure was not there. And Mississippi is a poor state. We couldn't afford, or we didn't choose to afford, to invest in those particular areas of the state. So that's when I first got involved in politics. And I became very active in emergency planning commissions and local emergency planning committees that really responded to disaster and socioeconomic changes. And I met a lot of wonderful people through the state organizations, through private organizations, through private foundations. And I began to realize that public health as a whole was not interested in keeping people well. It was interested in serving the interests of people who bought elections. And most of the time, that was Big Pharma. At this point in my career, which would have been 2013, I didn't really understand how strong the Big Pharma grip on society was. In 2014, I took a job as the assistant DON at a long-term care facility. And I began to understand that part of our industry. And when I thought we had been doing a lot with a little in hospitals, I really began to understand just how lean an operation nursing homes had to be to even exist. And they needed to exist because these people had nowhere to go. Fast forward briefly to now. Nursing homes are closing. And now, at 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning, we have elderly people in their 70s with chronic diseases that have nowhere to go. They can't go to a nursing home. They can't go to, maybe there's not one available where they are. Maybe they've proven to be too much or need too much care for what the nursing home can provide, so they won't accept them. There is no guarantee that you get into long-term care when you need it. They get to come look at you and see if you will be a good fit for them. And that's a flaw in the system. Although I understand, because the liability and risk that you take on when you take somebody into a long-term care facility is huge. So I don't necessarily agree with the system, but I understand the practices to be careful. So I did not do that for very long, although, again, I made tons of friends, and they're wonderful people doing God's work in a terrible situation. But my family needed me to do more. So in 2014, I went to work in Baton Rouge and Alexandria, Louisiana, as a travel nurse. And at that time, I had been out of the hospital for a little while. And it was very scary to go back to the bedside. But it came back like riding a bike. And I remembered why that particular job was so rewarding, because you got to impact people's lives in a way that was intimate and compassionate and really impacted lives. And I learned a lot. I learned a lot about teamwork. I learned a lot about moving tons of people through a busy ER and managing really serious injuries like burns. I was fortunate enough to spend a significant amount of time at Baton Rouge General and in Baton Rouge Health Systems, where they just do phenomenal work. And I met some of the best people I've ever had the privilege to work with there. And we are still friends to this day, because that's my work family, just like you are. So there is where we worked through plant explosions, the floods of 2016, the riots after Alton Brown, a couple of hurricanes, and our family was so close knit and so connected that I truly believed we could do anything. But the time came to move on. And I moved on to another hospital in the area, where I was given the honor of supervising at night one of the best trauma centers in the state of Louisiana, Our Lady of the Lake Medical Center. And that was the first time I had ever worked in a faith-based hospital where the nuns were actually on the premises. It was a wonderful experience in a fast-paced environment. I learned how to deal with violence, law enforcement, a whole new world of resources and abilities that we could help people with in the middle of the night. It was truly amazing to see the way those processes worked and to learn how you manage that amount of people in that kind of high stress, high pace environment. And then COVID hit. And we had been watching this virus that was evolving across the world. And those were some fabulously smart humans. And I remember Frank one time came to me, or I was involved in a conversation, and they were letting me know what the latest was in China as far as the virus went. And I jokingly said, well, I guess we got a couple of weeks, guys. This was probably the end of February. I had no idea I would be right. So right around March the 15th, I did not see my family again for months. We were scared. family and friends were reaching out via text and phone calls, asking what I thought, what I'd been seeing, and I didn't know what to tell them. I was scared shitless. This was a virus that did not act like anything I had ever seen before since 1997. People were scared. And then we had to do really terrible things, like prevent loved ones from coming to sit with their family members as they passed, because we just didn't understand. I remember one night they had called a code in the COVID wing, and we had, like most facilities, we had a clean side of the emergency room and a dirty side. And if you got in the dirty side at the bedside for patient care, you had to completely strip down, change clothes, the whole night, because we just didn't want to be transmitting the virus. Well, at this point, we had run out of PPE. Like, I was literally keeping a closer count on N95 masks than I did narcotics at the time. So when I responded to the code, it was someone who was in respiratory arrest, and there was not enough people who had PPE to do CPR. So I walked in there without all the gown, without all the things, and I did what needed to be done. There were lots of people who were shocked. There were lots of people who had something to say about it. It really didn't matter to me because the patient needed to be taken care of. Now that sounds reckless and that sounds foolhardy, but what I knew was that if I didn't touch my mouth and I didn't touch my eyes and I had a mask on, I'd probably be okay because it was airborne, droplet transmission. So people are railing nowadays about, oh, they never had any scientific evidence for 6 feet. No, they didn't. There had been no studies on it. You're absolutely right. What we did know is that if a bug is transmitted through the moisture coming out of your mouth, gravity works always, and it will pull it to the ground, usually within 6 feet. So we knew that would be relatively safe. That's called critical thinking. And I don't know what happened to people's critical thinking skills over the disasters and over the years, but they're virtually non-existent these days. And that's a real shame because you're going to need them to use AI. So as I wound down my time in COVID at Our Lady of the Lake, I began to get very ill. I did not realize how bad my health had gotten through malnourishment and sleep deprivation because I'd worked nights most of this time. And I didn't understand that I had not fueled my body. So when it was under stress and I was in a bathroom, I had tried to eat too fast for my little stomach that had been changed all those years ago, and I had not hydrated well enough. I had become constipated again. I started to throw up, and when I started to throw up violently, my esophagus ripped, and I almost bled to death. Well, I was hard-headed, so I did not admit that I was that sick to myself or anybody else. I unfortunately ignored my health until it got to where I could hardly stand up. And I got off one morning and had my family members go with me to my primary care doctor, who was an old friend's husband. I had worked with his wife in the emergency room years ago. And he said, I can't believe you left the emergency room and came to my office in this bad a shape. He said, Mystic, you have to go back. And you have to be a patient, not a nurse. Well, that was not what I wanted to hear. I had shit to do, And I didn't even get out what my usual directive was to whatever provider I was seeing, which was, I need you to fix me within 48 hours because I got shit to do. Well, that turned into days in the hospital, blood transfusions, iron transfusions, lots of up and down as far as my health went because I had no microbiome. The constipation over years and years and the chronic malnutrition had stripped all of the normal flora out of my stomach, and nobody could tell me that. I went to all the specialists, all of the specialists, and they did scopes, they did capsule studies, they did all the things. And all they could tell me was, well, we see where it's been stressed, like gastritis, or we see where there's a few little areas that are maybe problematic, like polyps in the future, but no real issue now. Well, they were looking structurally. This was at a time when we didn't look at stool for microbiome. We didn't have this information that there's such a strong brain gut connection. I was pessimistic. I was moody. I was passive aggressive. And these are the things that killed my marriage. Now, it was dead long ago from circumstances and finances and things like that. But who knows if it could have been fixed? I don't think it could have. I think the universe had something different in mind for all of us. But that's not anything I know for certain. So, my point here for all of you who are starting out your journey and walking both your professional and your wellness journey to preserve your body so that it serves you for the longest time imaginable. These are the lessons you need to learn from my mistakes. Pay attention to what you put in your mouth. Granny always said, if you aren't knocking the dirt off of it or the hide, you need to think twice about eating it. Now, I had no idea what she was talking about at the time. But it makes a whole hell of a lot of sense to me now. Nowadays, if it's got a barcode on it and comes in a wrapper, I generally won't eat it. There are some things I will, like supplements that are in wrappers or things like that, but I eat with intention these days. And we plan our meals, our groceries, our trips, the businesses that we support locally and in our travels around nutritious food, because I use food as medicine. So back to 2021 now, I believe. It was time to leave that facility, and I went to travel nurse in New Orleans, where I worked at a couple of facilities, both wonderful places. And through yet another hurricane, yet another week or so sleeping on construction room floors and blow up mattresses, we survived another disaster. And through all of that stress and trauma, I lost my best friend on four legs, Falco. He had been my nephew's service dog when he was little. My sister had passed away in 2016. And he was all I had left of her. When he died, I was devastated. I did not know what to do next. I had lost my marriage. My kids were grown. They had all looked at me and said, "Hey, Mom, we're good. We're grown-ass men. Go live your life." Well, what the fuck was I supposed to do? I had no idea how to live. I had done nothing but raise babies and work. for 25 years. So I sat in it for a minute to see. I meditated on it. I looked at the options. I thought about what I really wanted for the first time in my life. And I remembered I loved to travel. And I remembered a conversation I had with a dear, dear friend at the lake. He's a pharmacist. He's one of the first pharmacists that they put on the night shift, Dylan. And he's a world traveler. And he asked me one night, we were having a nurse's desk conversation. He said, "Mister, what do you really want?" I said, "Well, I think I want to put my feet in the sand of every public beach I can find." And he was like, "You should do that. That would make you happy. You should do that." So as I'm in New Orleans and the hurricane has passed and recovery has started, I think about what Dylan said. And I think about what my kids had said. And then I thought, let's see what else is out there. I mean, I had married my high school sweetheart. I had had a whole bunch of babies. And then that had died. And I was forced to leave my hometown and move to have some peace. And when I looked around, I was in the beautiful city of New Orleans. And yes, it's not always safe. It is always beautiful. And I knew that it had more to give me than I had paid attention to so far. So I invited my best friends down, or maybe they invited me. They were going to Oktoberfest. Either way, we ended up at Oktoberfest. Standing in the park with lights and flowers in my hair and some of my favorite people on the planet, I realized there was more to life than misery and pain and hurt. And I decided I would travel. I came up with a grand plan for my ex-husband and my mother, who was raising my nephew and tending to my father, to watch over the boys. And I knew the community that had loved us so well my entire life, their entire lives, would watch out for them. And I went to see what the world was about, because I knew that in these changing times, they may need the resources as well as me. Like, we may need to know where to go. I looked back on all of my years in healthcare, and I realized a couple of things. We had made things so convenient for our patients that they no longer had accountability for their own health. I realized that we had put everything into an algorithm and on a computer screen, and we no longer remembered how to talk to people. So I thought, well, maybe you should figure out how to talk to people. So the easiest thing to do was date. Well, that was a fucking disaster. While my granny might have been great at internet dating, it was not something I wanted to do for very long. But in that process, I met Cliff. And regardless of how we met, we hit it off. I think the first conversation we ever had was something like 8 hours. And the time just flew. For the first time, somebody understood the way I thought, felt, and would listen to my experiences and understand my reservations and my hopes and dreams. And I didn't know that was possible. So as things evolve, I introduced him to my children and my family, which did not go over well. But I knew what I had found. And I knew that because they were ignorant, because they were so young, and they did not know what real relationship was, because quite frankly, I had not known that maybe they would come around if they could see. So we struck off, and I took a contract in North Carolina, and he functioned as my support system, my therapist, my healer. He would research diet patterns and foods and health food stores and supplements, and we really started to regrow the microbiome in my gut that had been so depleted for so many years. And we did the research, and we did it the slow and steady way. Even when I was still working in New Orleans, when we first started, I want to say dating, but that's just not strong enough of a word. When we first met, and we have been inseparable since, he was so invested in, because let me tell you, my dietary habits when we met were awful. Absolutely awful. I was surviving on whiskey, coffee, Diet Coke, pork rinds, and guacamole, hummus. Maybe rotate it through. I thought I was getting good fat with guacamole every now and then, but mostly it was hummus and olives. It was all I could eat. And I drank the whiskey for pain control, because I had had a GI doctor tell me that I didn't want to have narcotics because of the constipation I had suffered years and years ago. And he was like, I said, well, I mean, a shot of whiskey makes it not hurt. Is that okay? And he was like, well, I mean, if you have to. I took that as, if you don't want to take narcotics, drink whiskey, which was probably not the best decision. But I treated the pain for years with whiskey. Even years after Cliff and I got together. It wasn't until right before my daddy died in 2023 that I had slowly begun to realize that all the work Cliff and I had been doing to regrow my microbiome was being destroyed by the whiskey that I drank. And I drank it every day. It never really interfered with my functionality as a human, because I never really got drunk. It just killed the pain. I mean, I got drunk occasionally, but like, I didn't get drunk every day. I would drink a toddy before I went to bed and call it done. And I would sleep better because I didn't hurt. And I worked nights, so sleeping in the day was a big deal, because I only slept about 2 or 3 hours a day, which was not good either. So we left Louisiana and Mississippi behind, and we went to North Carolina, where we really started to focus on fresh, organic food and appropriate supplementation. At that point, I was able to get completely off of the pharmacological pills I was taking and replace that with nutrient-rich food and supplementation to fill the gaps where I couldn't get it in my diet. We also started to walk and exercise a little at a time and explore the area. And it really changed my outlook on a lot of things. We started eating more mushrooms and working very hard to make sure that our behaviors and lifestyle was a reflection of the way we wanted to feel. Now, I was still hoping to be involved in my children's lives at the time. I remember wanting to come home or go home for a very important wedding for my boys, one of my boys' best friends. They were raised as brothers, close to it, and we lived just down the road from each other. their parents and me and my ex-husband were very close friends. So Cliff knew that this was very important to me. And I worked a mid shift, which is like noon to midnight in the ER there in North Carolina. And the plan was we were going to drive home and surprise my boys by showing up at the wedding. And we did that. We got in the car and took off. Now, the only reason we made it to that wedding was because Cliff was bullish about getting me there. It was one of the most horrendous thunderstorms I have ever driven through outside of a hurricane. And it lasted from North Carolina to Georgia when it started snowing. I had offered to drive, even though I had worked beforehand and was going to try to nap. He was so tired after driving through all that bad weather. I offered to drive in Atlanta. And we got out of the car, went in the gas station, came back out to fill the car up, and it was fucking snowing. And I said, baby, I love you, but I ain't driving. And after we got a good laugh out of that, we got in the car and we went some more. And sure enough, as the sun came up in Alabama, I did drive for a little while and let him get a nap. And we arrived back in Mississippi in time for the wedding. And one of the best memories I have is my oldest son coming down the stairs excited to see me because I had made the wedding. And that was probably the last time I had that feeling. Now, I honestly don't know where we are as far as my relationship with my kids. But I have been investigating and asking every granny I can find what the secret is to mama and adult children. And I have acquired many work children over the years who share their lives with me, their struggles, and their challenges. And I'm fortunate enough to be able to be there to cheer them on. I wrote a book in 2022 because one of my favorite little ER techs finally graduated nursing school. And she's got all the common sense in the world, but a mouth that will just throw her under the bus quicker than anybody else will, because she doesn't even give other people the opportunity. She's doing great now. She's working at a trauma center and loving it. And I think back of all the other ones. I just had a phone call the other day from one of my very special work children. There are a few that I got to mentor, precept, whatever label you want to put on it. I got to be their work mama the first night they were ever a nurse. And that's an amazing privilege. And I treasure those relationships. I've been to weddings. I've been to religious rituals and ceremonies from different religions that my work children participated in. And I began to understand that pockets of people are different. But people as a whole are pretty similar. They want safety, security. They want to feel good. They want to experience life. And they want to enjoy their connections and relationships as often as possible. But what I saw when I looked across my profession was streets burning, zombies in the lobbies. These people who were so intelligent and so skilled at saving lives would talk about the state of our country in a way that was shocking to me. They wanted to focus on how to take advantage of the government, not support the country. They wanted to talk about how to make more money in an individual organization rather than what the good for the community could be. And I just couldn't get behind it. And most recently, I was accused of being racist for trying to protect a 23-year-old who ended up in my triage room at 2:30 in the morning, telling me he didn't remember the last 10 days, but got offended because I asked him if he remembered consuming any drugs or alcohol. Now, I've got a lot of time invested in emergency situations, and it has been my first-hand experience that regardless of the color of your skin, when you lose time, there's a chemical that caused it. It's got not one fucking thing to do with the color of your skin and everything to do with what you consumed. I've also learned that when you have pain, especially pain in your stomach, it has a hell of a lot to do with what you have consumed through your mouth. And I've got a lot of firsthand experience to know that when your head doesn't feel right in your mind, it has a lot to do with the health of the rest of your body. Not only do I know that from taking care of humans since 1997, but I know that because I've lived it. So why this podcast now? Well, as I've invested a lot of time and energy into learning a lot, with AI on the horizon, or here with us, I hear more and more of my work family talking about, on their off time, how we can make healthcare better. How can we fix this broken system? Not just from the people here in the U.S., but from our peers in the UK, in Australia, across Europe, and in Asia, India. The system is broken because we have allowed people to become too sick and not worried about changing their habits. We want to save them the inconvenience of changing their behaviors with a pill. And we chose to blindly swallow that shit and not ask the question, who profits from this? I remember a pharmacist long ago, back when I was still nursing in a little small town, the first hospital I ever worked in. His name was Lloyd, and he was smart as a whip. And he told me I would come to him with research articles, and I would say, Lloyd, this doesn't make any sense to me. What in the hell are we supposed to be doing with this? And he would say, Mystic, you can't ever make sense out of something when it's bought and paid for. And I didn't understand that until he explained to me that you have to look at who pays for the research to understand whether it's valid or not. So the fact that drug companies are allowed to sponsor research in universities is unacceptable. If you want science that can tell you how we need to progress and not how somebody else wants to profit. So when I look back and I talk to these new doctors and these new nurses, and the old ones too, who are thinking, what do we do now? This is not getting any better. It's getting exponentially worse. For God's sakes, people are shooting nurses in hospitals across this country. I have friends, family, who was run over in Pennsylvania trying to help somebody who showed up for help in the middle of the night. And I had to come home and tell Cliff when he asked, that could have been me. That's usually me in that triage room, standing between the safe and secure department where health problems can be investigated and healed, and the rest of the chaos outside. And when he asks me if I'm safe, I don't have a good answer for him, not one he likes. So I no longer say that we're heroes. We're at war. We're at war against chronic disease, yes. Corporate pharma, yes. Corporate ag, yes. A corporate food system that delivers chemicals packaged in pretty colors and nice little labels that catch your eye but are really killing you slowly. It's taken me a long time to learn that. But it hasn't taken me very much time at all to understand that if I know where my food comes from and I know who grows it and prepares it, that I feel like a whole new human. And I understand now that if I utilize the tools available to me to find the research and find the truth, the treasure comes right behind it. So this podcast now is because my family has gotten too big. I can't keep up with each individual one of them, but I can start a community that supports them, that honors their service, and that helps bring them the best resources that I can find and all the treasures that as my body wears out and I can't do the physically demanding things that I could when I was 18 and 50. It just doesn't work that way. That's just the laws of nature. That I can support them in the best way I know how, which is to find the truth and the treasures that they can use to make their tomorrows better than their todays. And that's why now is the time. And I want to thank each and every one of them, from Nev in LA to Amanda in the Pacific Northwest to Moira down in Arizona to Megan back in Maine, Katie, Ruben, Megan, there's lots of Megans. Heather, there's lots of Heathers too. Missy, there's lots of Missys too. Michael, all the ones who encouraged and supported me along this journey, who text routinely and say, are you ever going to do the podcast? Justine, yes, I'm doing the podcast. It's today, babe. All the ones that I said, I'm just a phone call away. All you have to do is reach out and I will be there for you. And that includes my own children who just choose not to reach out now. Maybe that'll get better. But as we build this community, I can't wait for my work family to meet each other and to support each other. And it occurred to me recently, as I went through my own hell of being accused of being racist and dealing with those humans in human resources, I had to leave a job that I wanted to keep for a long time. But it just was not a place I could practice in with that kind of mentality that chooses to ignore the blind spots where people are suffering. Like when you're a border facility and you want to ignore human trafficking. Where you want to support addictive practices and poor communication to patients, like you don't even want to tell them what's wrong. If someone who is intoxicated with methamphetamines has reached the point in their addictive process where they're hallucinating, and they say in my triage room, I see worms coming out of my arms, but you don't seem to see them. I have to be very honest and say, no, honey, I don't see them. It's the meth doing that to your brain. Somebody needs to tell them in a way they can understand. Just like, God forbid, when we lose patients. I hate death paperwork with a passion because it means we failed. Not us in the instance, but us as a profession, as humanity. We have failed to take care of a brother and sister who's now lost their life. I don't like those days. I want to be able to see Mama and Papa leave the ER and go home armed with the knowledge and tools to heal, laughing on the way out the door, saying, hey, it wasn't so bad after all. But that's just not our reality enough. So now, because my main focus is you, my work family may have watched me with bad habits in the past. I don't want you to think that's the way you need to live. I no longer drink 2 liters of Diet Coke a day. I no longer drink 3 or 4 pots of coffee a day. I drink water with concentrated mineral drops in them. Trace Minerals is the company that makes them. You can find it on my website. Because it changed my life. One of my favorite old family practice docs, he's dead and gone now, Dr. Isles. He had forgotten more about electrolyte management than most doctors ever know. And I allowed myself, through malnutrition and fatigue and chronic illness, to forget what he taught me. Was that electrolytes are the fuel that run your physiology, or the way your body works, in all manner of organ systems and processes. But if you don't balance your electrolytes, like you have to put in enough so that your body can use it and then get rid of the waste, so it is a tank that always needs to be refueled, then you don't have the tools you need to live and thrive. So now I spend a lot of time consuming organic food prepared with care in adventurous activities that feed me body, soul, and spirit. Recently, we have joined a club for prospectors in the Pacific Northwest. And that club, WPMA, Washington Prospectors and Mining Association, is a wonderful group of people who enjoy exploring nature, understanding geology, and what Mother Earth can give to us. We've also been fortunate enough to spend some time in dark sky country down in Arizona, and we learned about the stars and the connection between the sky and the earth, and what it means, and how it feeds your spirit. I remember standing at the seawall in Maine, and the stars looked like Christmas lights you could reach out and touch on the tree. It was the most beautiful thing I had ever seen in my life to that point. Most recently, Cliff took me to the top of Mount Baker, and we got to see the Aurora Borealis for the first time, the Northern Lights. Aurora Borealis for the first time. My Southern doesn't do that very well, but the Northern Lights. They were beautiful. I've gotten to meet Canadians who work on this side of the border that have told me stories about polar bear hunts in the island off the continent. I had to look it up. I had no idea what he was talking about. But it sounds like a fabulous adventure. We've climbed mountains. We've driven through fire. We've waded through mud. We've explored beaches. And we've been all the way around the lower 48 coastline. And I'm here to bring you those memories and those places and those views so you can feed your soul, because it helped me heal mine. And I'm here to help you on your journey if you need it. The first step is to hit that subscribe button and turn on all the bells and whistles so that you know when we have news to share. The next thing you can do is visit mamamysticsroadshow.com, because a lot of our information and resources can be found there. And the third thing you can do is tune in for the very first real episode of Mama Mystics Roadshow, because I'm going to introduce you to Barb. And Barb owns Barb's Pies and Pastries in Ferndale, Washington. And she is a gem. She is amazing. And I can't wait for you to meet her. And we're going to bring you small business owners, real humans doing real work in service, in communities, their struggle and their triumphs. Because we need to talk to each other, human to human. Even in this world where AI is such a buzzword and such in the forefront of our minds right now, we need to learn what it is and how to use it to make our lives better, not to take it over. So I'm here to help you do that. I've explored the tools. I want to bring the best minds and put them around a campfire, and let's talk about it. We're going to have Match My Selfie challenges where I want to see your evidence. Bring the receipts to Mama Mystic. Put it on one of the social media pages. We'll have themed social media pages. We'll have Granny Wisdom. We'll have Pawpaw Wisdom. We'll have travel. We'll have family adventures. We'll have rock hounding adventures, mining adventures, all the things you need to know to share the sparkle that is a truly content and purpose-filled life with your loved ones. And I hope we're in that mix. There's more to come. There are more stories. There are more lessons. But as Cliff taught me very well, they're life lessons, not life sentences. And we'll bring our wisdom and all the wisdom we collect to share it with you. Now, I won't promise it's always going to be calm. Zombies tend to throw me for a loop and I get really bent out of whack. The last zombie I encountered walked up to me in a lobby to complain about her 30-minute wait time before she got to go back to the emergency room for stomach pain, even as she brushed the Lay's potato chips off her boobs. She informed me that because we did not have appropriate charging stations for her to be entertained with her phone, that it was now my problem that she was impatient. She used lots of adjectives and not as many words. And these are the situations that we all face. And if we're not handling them in a way that promotes the mission of our profession, not the profits of our facility, then what are we really doing? I'm going to tell you, for me, I'm going to piss every one of them off. I'm going to ask them what the fuck they ate. I'm going to tell them that's bad for you. And I'm going to tell them I struggle with the same thing. It's hard for me to turn that cookie down. God knows I love a cookie. Especially an insomniac cookie ever since Dang Dang got me addicted. But I do my best. And it's one decision at a time. And I use my iNAMS framework to remember that when I feel anxious, I can breathe. When I feel angry or emotional, because Jesus, menopause is its own little roller coaster. I'll share with you how I'm managing that. And I'll ask you to tell me how you're managing if you're struggling with the same things. I'm going to bring you the new mamas that are bringing new life into this world. And I'm going to ask you to give them all of your wisdom. I'm going to give them all of mine. I've been doing it for years because I believe the one thing we can do to ensure a better tomorrow for all of humanity is to take care of the mamas who care about their kids. And I know that mamas show that in a lot of different ways, but I know that there's something different in a mama and a biological mother. There's a Bible story about a mama whose child was taken away from her and claimed by another woman. And when the king said, okay, we'll cut the baby in half and you can each have a piece, it was the mama that said no. If the baby is harmed, I want none of it. Let her have the baby so that it can live. I can tell you from firsthand experience, those are not easy decisions to make. But that's what a real mama is. The one that's willing to suffer for her kids. And I'm going to share with you the lessons that I learned about that, because I thought, just like I thought burnout was a badge of honor, that I had worked hard enough to deserve to be burnt out. It's not. It's a death sentence. But allowing your children to learn how to cope and not do everything for them, that was a hard lesson for me to learn. I literally had to move across the country so I could let them learn how to be men. And I hope one day they'll realize that. In the meantime, and my daddy used to say I've never really been gifted with patience, but I've heard some really smart people recently say that patience is what you learn how to do in the meantime. So where my own kids are concerned, I'm being patient right now. And in the meantime, I'm taking care of my work children and my work family and the community that we're building, because it matters. And many of you know I've shared my dream with many of you. It is my dream one day to have a network of places, resorts, lodges, destinations, where we can go as a group and decompress and heal the moral injury that the industry of medicine has inflicted on all of us, where we can start to heal the PTSD that we all live with and struggle with even as we serve. That we can start to heal the families that were broken with the lockdowns of COVID. That we can start to heal from the violence in the streets today. Because there is no excuse for senseless loss of life. Whether it's taken at an individual's own hand or not. We've lost too many brothers and sisters to suicide, to overdose, to violence. It has to stop. And it's the stopping, it starts with healing ourselves first. So I would encourage you to join along, play the challenges, do the things, damn it. Stock yourself so you can serve. Right, Mel? See you down the road.